So, one of my fabulous moms in the Stubborn Child Solutions Facebook group, she asked me, she says, I am so frustrated. My girls just won't come when I call them to lunch or bedtime. Does this sound familiar? If so, you are in the perfect place. This is a common challenge, but there's a lot of easy, simple things you can do to downplay it so it doesn't become this big thing. Asking our kids to come to lunch or to dinner or bedtime, if that's happening every single day and it's like pulling teeth, or you're like, hey, time for dinner, and it's crickets, nothing, this is something that can make such a big difference to your day to day. So we're going to jump right in here. If you like this video, I would sure appreciate giving a thumbs up and or sharing it with a mom who could really use some support right now. So let me just bring up some thoughts here I have for you. So the first thing to note is that, kids are like us. I don't know about you, but when I get wrapped up in either a project or hobby I really like, I don't love being disturbed. And so sometimes we forget that we are so task oriented as moms, or we're like, okay, it's lunch, let's go, we're getting ready for bedtime, that we don't give them that wiggle room and just that simple, hey, just so you know, in 5 minutes time, it's going to be ready for bed. Just giving them the heads up that it's coming to prepare them can be huge. Kids, especially stubborn child, or kids who are strong-willed, they often have difficulty shifting with transition. They're so focused and engrossed in what they're doing. It can be really hard for them to shift. So make it easier for them by giving them a heads up. Second thing you can do is to offer a choice. So this could look like, hey, we're almost at bedtime. Do you want 5 minutes to wrap up or 10 minutes to wrap up? And once they give you their number, or maybe they'll say like nothing, I'm like, that's not the choice. You either have 5 or 10 minutes. Do you want to choose or do you want me to choose? And if they are not choosing, say, okay, it'll be 5 minutes today. And then oftentimes they'll be like, wait a minute, I want 10 minutes. Great. Then use a timer. And the timer isn't just for your child. The timer is for you. I find a lot of us moms are great talkers. We can also get engrossed in our own stuff. So maybe a call comes in, maybe we're suddenly on an email or doing a text, and that 5 minutes turns into 15 minutes. And our kids notice that. And so the timer is for us to make sure that we're also being punctual and we're also following through on what we said we were going to do. Follow through is so critically important, but it's also important on how you do that follow through. So if you are like, okay, it's 5 minutes, and acting like that kind of police cop that's like the bad cop who's like, hey, you're in trouble if you don't do it, that often doesn't go far with our kids. I think what's important to remember is that connecting before we are directing them is really, really important. And so this can look like, just putting a hand on their shoulder and directing them. The other thing that can be really useful is if, for instance, they're engrossed in a movie or engrossed in a show, cutting it off when the show is actually finished. So there's actually an end point. It's like bookending the parts that are important to our children, and or it's going over and just clicking it off and shutting it off for them. But when you do that, it's not a grabby kind of thing, not a top down. It's putting a hand on the shoulder, hey, it's time to end. And if they start freaking out, then you can just acknowledge it and say, hey, I can see you're really upset. It's still time to end. And so this connecting before we get into directing, I think what's really important is to remember that we're still headed for lunch. We're still headed for bedtime. Now, as I say that, I want to talk about consistent with routines. The more consistent you can be with routine, the better off. So I just want you to reflect upon, how consistent are you really? Are there places where it's a moving target, where the time changes? And the reason I'm asking this is because strong-willed kids like routine, need routine. They need to know what's coming and what's expected of them. Because if you're not doing that, they will run the show. And if you've given a lot of wiggle room or have been too flexible in the past, often they'll rely on that and they'll push you even harder to see where those boundaries are. So they really do thrive on predictability. So when it comes to meal times, when it comes to bedtimes, I have found with stubborn kiddos, the best thing to do is to save your flexibility for the creativity in games or on vacation. By all means, but even on vacation, I find that bedtime is still a good one, but you might have more wiggle room with lunch and that kind of thing. How does this sound to you? I wanted you to ask yourself, A, what have you found that has worked? Because I would love to know. And B, of the ones I've shared, what are the ones you think, I could really raise my game in that area? I'd also love to know that. Sometimes resistance from them is just a bit of some of their emotional needs that are going unfulfilled. And so sometimes if they've had a tougher day and we don't really know that, or maybe your child's getting their molars in, or maybe your child is coming down with a cold or a flu and you don't even know it yet. Sometimes just taking a few minutes to cuddle, to chat, to rub their back, to read a story with them can go miles in terms of making sure that their emotional cup is full and make those transitions that much smoother. So lastly, and most maybe importantly, is to practice empathy. When I said that, if they're upset about it, it's like, hey, by all means, I can see you're upset about it. If I was your age, I probably would be too. We still need to get to bed because that is mommy's role in your life. That's partly why we have parents. So I really thank you for joining me today. Next week, I'd love to do a part two to this. And the reason I'd like to do a part two is that if you're still feeling that there's resistance there, then what we need to do is kind of look below that iceberg to what we can't see below the surface. And I've got a few tips and tricks there that I would like to share with you. I want to thank you on behalf, especially if you haven't heard it lately, for all you do as a parent day in, day out. I know it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I just appreciate all you do. And I hope you also remember that parenting isn't about being perfect. It's about doing our best to connect in a way that feels good for our kids, but also connecting to what's important to us. I send you lots of love and I look forward to seeing you soon. If you haven't yet joined my Stubborn Child Solutions Facebook group, I invite you to come on over. These are the videos that I provide there. And you can also ask questions of me in the message box, and I love answering those. Take care. Bye-bye.